Hello, and welcome to Counseling and Career Services online resume and cover letter writing workshop. This is part 3 of a 5-part series. In this video, we will cover the content and sections that you want to include in your resume. The other parts of our series include what makes a resume effective, setting up your document, writing tips, and cover letters. Throughout the video, I may be referring to exercises or samples, and these can be found through our online resume guide, which is available on our website, ulethbridge.ca/CES. There is also a link to these exercises below. If you're watching this video on our YouTube channel, the link will be in the description for the video. If you're watching this video through our blog, you'll see the link right below. You can also pick up hard copies of these exercises and samples in our office in Anderson Hall, room AH153, or in the main offices on our northern campuses. As we discuss content and sections to include in your resume, you may find it helpful to take a look at some samples. These are included in Appendix H of the online resume writing guide, and as I just mentioned, you can find links to these below. The first section you'll want to have on your resume is, of course, your contact information. So you'll want to include your name, address, phone number, email address, and if you have LinkedIn, a link to your LinkedIn profile. A couple of things to remember. Make sure that you use a bold font for your name, and we recommend increasing the font size to a 20 or 22 point font. This will just help your name to stand out and help the reader to remember who you are. For your address, if for some reason you don't want to include your entire address, we do recommend that you at least include your current city. It's important to remember to keep all of your information professional. So this means things like making sure that you're using a professional sounding email address. Typically we recommend something with your name included in it. Your uleth address works fine. You also want to think about things like your voicemail message on your phone. The goal of the resume is to get an interview, and in order to set up that interview, employers are likely to phone you. Therefore, you want to make sure that your voicemail message sounds nice and professional and wouldn't put them off if they heard it. Finally, it's important to remember to keep your personal information safe. If you are applying directly with an employer, you can expect them to keep your information confidential. If you choose to post your resume onto an online job board that anybody has access to, like Kijiji or Monster, make sure that you're redacting certain information in order to keep yourself safe from identity theft. This would mean taking out things like your phone number and your address. You may even want to create a separate email account that you use only for your job search. The next section we'll discuss is a profile. This is an optional section, meaning it's not required, but you may choose to include it in order to give yourself an extra chance to introduce yourself. And that's really what a profile is for. You can include different types of information like skills, education, experience, expertise level, passions, career goals, or personal qualities. This section is meant to grab the reader's attention and make them want to learn more about you. A profile section would typically take the place of an objective statement. The reason we recommend a profile rather than an objective is because a profile allows you to speak directly to a particular role and state what you have to offer to that role. In contrast, an objective statement is more self-focused. It states, "My objective is for you to hire me." It really only talks about what you want, not what you have to offer. The template I have on the screen here is meant to give you an idea of how you might write a profile statement. Remember, this is just an idea. It's not the only correct way to write a profile statement. You can choose what works for you. However, oftentimes we find that people have a hard time getting started, so using a template like this might help. In the 2 blank spaces to begin with, you can think of some descriptive words that would describe you to a potential employer. Then you could think about describing yourself in terms of your educational identity. So this might be something that would include your major or the fact that you're graduating. If you have some experience, you could include that next. And then we want to make sure that we are tailoring this particular statement towards the position that you're applying for. So you can state that you're seeking the position of the name and the job number with whichever company it is. What that's going to do is explain to the employer that you have tailored this resume specifically for your application with their company, rather than creating one resume and just sending it off to 100 different employers. After this statement, you can add an extra sentence or two if you'd like, and you can include things like how this position fits with your relevant career goals, what it is that you're passionate about, or any special information that you can't include in the rest of your document or that you want to specially highlight. It always makes a little bit more sense when we have some samples to go by. So here are a few. The first example could be used by a nursing student seeking an undergraduate nursing position. And it might read something like, energetic and compassionate Bachelor of Nursing student with clinical experience in ER, seeking undergraduate nursing position with Alberta Health Services. A second example could be used by a new graduate seeking an accounting position. It might read, motivated and detail-oriented accounting graduate with co-op and volunteer tax preparation experience, seeking articling position with ABC accounting firm, willing to relocate and ready to start immediately. So those are just a couple of examples to get you thinking what this might sound like. You can also find other samples in the sample section of the online resume guide, which is listed in Appendix H. So I encourage you to take a few moments to pause the video and try writing a sample profile for yourself. Don't worry too much right now as to whether or not you really want to use a profile in your document. Just try writing one and see if you like it. If you think it's great, include it in your resume. If for whatever reason you're not liking it, again, remember it's an optional section, so you can choose to include it or not. If you're having trouble thinking of those great adjectives, those descriptive words, I encourage you to take a look at the exercise called Describe Yourself. It's available in Appendix E. This exercise lists a whole bunch of different descriptive words. Go through them and start highlighting the ones that you think are most reflective of you and your skills. Then think of using them in your profile description. Another section that you'll want to think about is education and training. Education would typically include formal education like university or college credentials. Training would include other training programs, things like CPR, WMIS, or on-the-job safety training. You may choose to use a combined heading, education and training, and lump these two pieces together. If you want to more strongly emphasize one piece than the other, then consider breaking them up into two sections, one for education and a separate one for training. Think about what's most relevant for the job and put the most important information earlier in your document. The order in which you present your information is important because people are more likely to notice the things that you put earlier in your document than those that you put towards the end. For many students and new graduates, it makes a lot of sense to start off with education towards the beginning of your document, particularly if you have little relevant work experience. That's because your education is often one of the most important pieces of information that you have to offer an employer. You have the relevant educational background for the position or role that you're applying for. You want to start off by listing the name of the degree or credential first, and choose some formatting that allows this information to stand out, like bolding or italics. So this would be things like Bachelor of Science Biochemistry or Bachelor of Fine Arts Music. Next, you want to include the name of the school where you received the credential, the city and province where the school is located, and your completion date. If you're in the middle of your credential and haven't yet completed your program, then just include information to let the reader get some context as to where you are in your program. So you might list something like second year, or if you're close to the end of your program, consider saying something like anticipated completion date, December 2016. If you want to add more detail to this section, consider adding bullet points beneath. You might include things like your grade point average, some description of relevant projects that you've worked on, scholarships or awards, clubs you've participated, committees, extracurriculars, or other things like that. Now, think carefully about where you want to put this information. If you want to go into depth about a relevant project and really strongly highlight all of the skills that you used in that project, you may be better served by moving that information into a separate section titled Relevant Projects. So, moving on from education, the next section that you might want would be a skill summary section. This is often something that you would see in a combination style format, and it's often very effective for people who don't have quite as much related work experience, but still have lots of great skills to offer to an employer. You could use lots of different titles or headings for a section like this: Summary of Qualifications, Highlights of Qualifications, Areas of Effectiveness, Professional Skills Summary. There's lots of different options, so just choose whatever feels right for you. If you want some ideas of different headings, you can take a look at Appendix G, Headings and Titles. A section like this can be very effective in helping you to highlight the skills that you have to offer that are matched to the skills listed in the job posting. So you're going to use that job posting as a guideline when you think about what skills to summarize in this section. Include information about your technical skills that are relevant to your particular industry, as well as transferable skills that you may have developed in other settings but are still relevant to the position that you're applying for. Rather than simply listing a bunch of skill words and letting the reader assume that you have demonstrated those skills, include concrete evidence of how you have used those skills in past experiences like work, volunteer opportunities, or class. This is one of the great parts about including a section like this, is that it lets you highlight more than just your past work experience, but also focus on things that you've developed through all of those other aspects of your life. We're going to take a look at a couple of different examples to show you what a section like this might look like. If you're having trouble writing out that concrete evidence, make sure that you watch part 4 of our video series, which gives you some ideas for some writing tips. Here's an example titled Summary of Strengths, and you can see that we've chosen 4 different categories of skills to highlight: project management, communication, research and writing, and computer skills. When you're thinking about what skills to highlight, remember to use that job posting as a guideline. If you read through a posting and you start to think, okay, these are 4 or 5 key areas that the employer is looking for, and these are the keywords that they're using, I could use those to start off each of my sections. However, it's not enough to simply write down those skill words and leave it at that. Your resume will be far more effective if you then take the time to add some detail explaining how you've actually demonstrated those skills. Then you're providing evidence to the employer. And they don't have to just say, oh, okay, I believe you when you say you have those skills. They can see, okay, these are the situations in which you've demonstrated those skills. You can pause the video to read each of the descriptions in detail, but there's a few things to note while you do. With the project management section, notice things like over 2 years supervisory experience. So rather than simply stating that you've worked in retail sales, you've explained how much experience you have and your role as a supervisor. In the communication section, see how we've talked about working with groups of 5 to 100 people? Adding this quantifying information helps the reader to understand that, okay, you've worked with small groups and large groups. We've got some language skills here as well. And if you don't have enough to really fill in a full language section, but you still want to include them, communication might be a good section to do that. With the research and writing section, we've really explained what we mean by this. And with each of these different skill sections, it's important to explain your meaning because it might not always mean the same thing to every person. With the computer section, we've provided some qualifying information by stating that we have proficient skills. Stating whether your skills are basic, intermediate, or advanced can really help the employer to get some context. Now you can see that we've also listed Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and Access specifically, instead of simply stating that we know Microsoft Office Suite very well. So sometimes people wonder about things like this because they just assume that everybody has a certain level of proficiency in basic programs like this. Take your job posting as a guide for how much detail to get into. Many job postings will still specifically state that they are looking for a candidate who has a certain level of skill with each piece of Microsoft Suite, including things like Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. Now, you may have very advanced skills with Word and PowerPoint, but only basic skills with Excel, and maybe you don't even know what Access is. So again, it's a good idea to provide some qualifying information to talk about what level of proficiency you have in each different area. Here's another example you can take a look at. Note how we've provided information on our foundational skills, how we've provided quantifying information where possible, and how we've allowed the reader to get a good idea of the context in which we've demonstrated these skills. That's the kind of detail that we're looking at, and that's the kind of detail that will help to set your resume apart. The next section that we'd like to discuss is work experience. If you have any experience in a work setting that is directly related to your particular job target, consider sectioning out your experience into different sections so that you can immediately highlight your most relevant experience and then later put your other work experience in a second section titled Additional Experience or Other Work Experience. You can choose a title like Relevant Experience or Career-Related Experience, or if you can, try to come up with a title that really reflects the kind of experience. So this could be something like laboratory-related experience, or management experience, or human services experience. If you have other work experience that is not directly related to your current job target, you can include that information in a separate section titled something like Additional Experience. For all of your experience sections, you'll want to make sure that you're adding relevant detail to describe what you did in each role and how you excelled. You'll want to focus on your skills. So for your related experience, it might be a little bit easier to identify which skills to highlight. In your additional experience section, focus on those transferable skills that might be relevant from one role to another. In part 4 of our video series, Writing Tips, we'll really dive into detail about how you can add relevant information into each of these sections. So for right now, let's just think of an example. Let's say you're a human resources student about to graduate. You've completed one co-op term in a human resources role, and you've also worked part-time waiting tables throughout your 4 years of university. When you're thinking of describing your work experience, you could first start off with Human Resources Experience as a heading. In that section, you'll add an entry to describe your HR co-op role. Next, you'll have a heading titled Additional Experience, and in that section, you'll add entries for where you can talk about how you've waited tables. When you're waiting tables, you're going to be developing some transferable skills, particularly things like interpersonal and communication skills. So those are the skills that you highlight in this section. Even though it's not an HR role, it's still relevant to an employer. Moving on from work experience, we can also think about adding other valuable sections to our resume, including volunteer or extracurricular activities. Including volunteer work or extracurricular projects can be a great way to showcase to employers another aspect of how you've developed your skills. This can also be a really good way to help you build skills if you're just starting out in your industry or your field and you don't have a lot of relevant work experience. So take some time to consider where you could actually gain some skills, where you could spend your time volunteering or working on extracurricular projects. Another great thing about being involved in these ways is that they give you really good networking opportunities. So this is a great way to not only build your resume, but also meet people that might give you an idea of different opportunities in your chosen field. Another section that you might choose to include would be interests and activities. This section could allow you to show a little bit of your personality and give the employer a sense of who you are as a person. If you choose to include a section like this, remember to keep things professional and don't go into too much personal detail. Typically, you would want to keep this to one of the very last sections in your resume. It's important, but it certainly doesn't trump information like your education, skills, or relevant work experience. The final section that we're going to discuss is references, and we always recommend including references on your resume. Now, sometimes people find that to be a little bit of a controversial choice, but as I mentioned in one of our earlier videos, it's always important to think about your reasoning behind your choices. So I'll explain the reasons that we recommend including references. First of all, it shows confidence that you have people ready and willing to speak well on your behalf. If your references are community leaders or people well known in your field, that already helps to boost an employer's opinion of you. There are some employers that don't really care about seeing your references at the resume stage. They would want that more at an interview stage. But there are other employers that are really hard and fast in wanting to see your references on your resume. So I recommend erring on the side of caution and including them. Those who don't really need to see it yet are more likely to disregard it than those who want to see it and don't. If you choose to include references, you'll want to include the person's name, their job title, the name of their company, their phone number, and email is optional. If their job title and company name don't clearly explain their relationship to you, you can add that in brackets. So you could say something like previous supervisor at ABC company or character reference. The strongest references are those who are most recent and relevant to your current job target. Work supervisors and academic references work well because these people are seen to be objective and you have some type of accountability towards them. Avoid asking family members for reference or your peers. And don't forget to ask each person's permission before including them on your resume. This concludes part 3 of our online resume workshop. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions or would like assistance. You can contact us at ces.students@uleth.ca or give us a call at 403-317-2845.